Hey, stop scrolling for just 2 seconds. Yeah, you. Take a breath. Feel your shoulders drop. Because what you're about to step into isn't just history, it's a different universe. Forget TikTok noise, forget the emails, forget whatever the world is throwing at you today. Tonight, you're traveling somewhere your mind hasn't dared to go in a long time. A place so breathtaking it could silence an entire room in New York. So disciplined it would humble anyone watching from London, so poetic it would feel unreal even to someone in Sydney, and so brutal it could chill the spine of viewers in Toronto, Berlin, or Los Angeles. A world painted in sakura petals, built on unbreakable honor, and ruled by blades sharp enough to decide a man's fate with a single breath. This is Feudal Japan, where beauty and terror lived side by side, where life was ritual, where death was duty, and where your destiny was written before you ever opened your eyes. But before we walk through those ancient gates, a tiny favor. If stories like this, stories that make the past feel alive, stories that make you feel something, if that hits your soul even a little, then tap that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community stretch across continents, from America to Europe to Australia, like a map lighting up in real time. Alright, now dim your lights. Let the room fall quiet. Sink into your bed or your couch, and imagine waking up in a world where your choices don't belong to you, where honor is heavier than freedom, and where one wrong move could cost you everything. Welcome to Feudal Japan. The birth trap, born into chains, the world you're about to step into had no mercy for your dreams. Because in Feudal Japan, your first breath already decided your destiny. The morning sun rises quietly over the rice fields. Mist curls through the narrow valleys, wrapping every house, every soul, in silence. A baby cries, the first sound of life in a tiny wooden hut. But in this world, that cry doesn't mean freedom. It means chains. In Feudal Japan, the moment you were born, the invisible lines of society closed around you like an iron cage. Your family name, your father's occupation, your ancestors' mistakes. They carved your path long before you took your first step. There was no American dream, no European rebirth. Here, hope was a luxury reserved only for the powerful. You didn't choose to be a samurai, a farmer, or a merchant. The system chose for you, and once chosen, you never escaped. Imagine being born in a world where even your clothing color told others who you were. The silk of the samurai, the rough hemp of the peasant, the filth-stained rags of the untouchable. Each fabric carried its own shame or pride. And to wear the wrong one was a crime punishable by death. Parents didn't dream of what their children would become. They already knew. A blacksmith's son would heat metal until his hands cracked and bled. A farmer's daughter would marry another farmer and die before 50. Her spine bent like the rice she harvested. Even before learning to walk, children were already walking toward their graves. At the top of this human pyramid stood the samurai, the warriors bound by honor, pride, and blood. Below them, the peasants, who fed the entire nation but starved themselves. Then came the artisans, creators of beauty they could never afford. Below them, the merchants. The ones who moved wealth but were considered spiritually dirty for touching money. And finally, below all, hidden from light and law, the Ada and Heinen, the untouchables. The ones who handled the dead, cleaned the blood, and buried the sins of the nation. In this society, to be poor wasn't a misfortune, it was a sentence. A sentence written at birth and enforced by the gods of tradition. Even the act of dreaming, of wanting more, was dangerous. If a peasant was found with a silk cloth, a sword, or even a book meant for higher classes, his punishment was immediate and public. A lesson to the village: you are what you are born to be. Nothing more. The American or European viewer might ask, why didn't they fight back? But rebellion wasn't bravery here, it was suicide. Every rule, every expectation, was wrapped in religion, fear, and duty. To disobey your role meant dishonoring your family, and dishonor was a disease worse than death. A samurai who failed his lord didn't wait for judgment. He took his own life with a short blade, a ritual known as seppuku, to cleanse his shame with blood. Even death had rules, and breaking those rules brought disgrace to generations. For the peasants, life wasn't just hard, it was hopelessly predictable. Every sunrise, They'd kneel in muddy fields, planting rice not for themselves, but for the empire. Every sunset they'd bow before tax collectors who stripped away what little they had left. A farmer's worth was measured not by his harvest, but by how much pain he could endure without complaint. The same sun that shone on the castle roofs of Kyoto also burned the backs of peasants who would never see the inside of those walls. The same rain that washed the samurai's armor turned into floods that drowned the farmer's fields. The heavens were equal, but men were not. And what about love? It too was a privilege. Marriages weren't about hearts, they were transactions. A samurai's daughter might be sold to another clan for political gain. A peasant girl might be given away to settle a debt. Even in love, you had no right to choose. The heart belonged to the class, not the person. If you were born at the bottom, your hands would never know softness, your feet would never touch temple stone, and your name would never be written in the records of the living. The system was designed so perfectly, so cruelly, that even those suffering believed it was sacred. They didn't curse the order. They thanked the gods for their misery, because in feudal Japan, obedience was survival. Occasionally, a story would spread of a farmer's son who ran away to become a warrior, of a merchant's child who tried to learn the way of the sword. Those stories never ended with triumph. They ended with heads on pikes, their names erased, their families punished. Freedom wasn't a dream, it was a warning. The powerful justified it all through philosophy. The samurai said, "The sword and the brush are not for the same hands." Meaning, those who fight must not think. Those who think must not fight. It was a system built on walls, and those walls were invisible, but harder than stone. Centuries later, when the West would finally meet Japan, travelers from Europe and America would describe it as a land of beauty and silence. But they didn't see the silence for what it really was, the sound of millions of souls living under perfect control. No screams, no revolutions, no chaos. Just obedience. And that's why the Japanese Empire lasted for centuries, because every man, woman, and child knew their place. They didn't live their lives, they performed them. So, if you think being born in the wrong family is unfair today, imagine being born in a time when your blood decided your destiny, your silence decided your safety, and your obedience decided if you would live to see the next sunrise. That was the birth trap of feudal Japan, a beautiful world built on invisible chains. Would you survive even one morning, knowing your life was written before you were even born? The Samurai Code, Bushido, the beauty and terror of honor. Hey guys, welcome back. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing in a silent courtyard, the kind where every sound, a distant wind, a drop of rain, feels heavier than words. In front of you, a warrior kneels, perfectly still. His armor gleams like polished stone, his sword rests beside him, and his face is calm, not peaceful, just empty. Because in this moment, he's preparing to die, not in battle, but for honor, and that was the way of the samurai. To understand feudal Japan, you have to understand Bushido, the way of the warrior. It wasn't just a code, it was oxygen, invisible but absolute. Every breath a samurai took, every word he spoke, every step he made, was governed by this ancient philosophy of discipline, loyalty, and death. From childhood, samurai were taught that life itself was temporary, but honor, that was eternal. To die with honor was to die beautifully. To live without it was worse than any wound. A samurai's life began not with freedom, but with rules. Rules so detailed they controlled everything from how he ate, how he spoke, how he bowed, to how he killed. Even laughter had a limit. Too much joy meant carelessness. Too little emotion meant arrogance. The perfect samurai balanced between stillness and fire, between obedience and silent rage. They learned early that a single mistake could erase a lifetime of loyalty. You didn't just serve your lord, you belonged to him. Your sword was his sword, your blood, his property. If he ordered you to burn your home, you bowed. If he ordered you to die, you thanked him for the honor. Imagine growing up in that world. At the age of 7, you're taken from your mother and handed to a sword master. The training begins before dawn. You're beaten when you hesitate, starved when you disobey, and humiliated when you show fear. Pain isn't punishment, it's instruction. and every bruise whispers the same truth. Your life isn't yours anymore. When others played, you practiced. When others slept, you stood watch. You learned not just how to fight, but how to die beautifully, without flinching, without sound. Because someday your death might be a performance for others to watch and remember. Bushido was built on 7 virtues: loyalty, courage, honor, respect, honesty, compassion, and integrity. But these weren't just pretty words carved into scrolls. They were weapons, each one sharper than a katana, each one capable of destroying a man who failed to uphold them. Take loyalty. In the West, it's a feeling. In feudal Japan, it was law. If your lord's enemy burned your village, you didn't cry for your home. You sharpened your sword and rode into fire for him. If he fell in battle, you didn't retreat. You followed him into death. A loyal samurai didn't just serve. He surrendered, mind, body, and spirit. Then there was honor. To live honorably meant to live without shame. And shame could come from anything: losing a duel, dropping your sword, disobeying an order, even accidentally turning your back on a superior. And when shame arrived, there was only one way: to wash it away, seppuku. Imagine this scene: a quiet tatami room, a white robe, a short blade laid carefully on a cloth. The samurai kneels, takes a deep breath, and begins the ritual. He cuts open his abdomen, not out of despair, but to show purity of spirit, the courage to face death directly. A second samurai, his kaishakunin, waits behind him, ready to deliver a swift decapitation, a final act of mercy. Silence. Honor restored. Blood becomes beauty. To a Westerner, it's madness. To a samurai, it was poetry. And poetry was a part of it. Many samurai wrote verses before their final act, short, perfect, fleeting. A death poem. Something like a falling blossom, returning to the branch? No, a butterfly. Even in dying, they sought elegance. Even in blood, they sought peace. That was Bushido, not just war, but art, not just discipline, but aesthetic suffering. The samurai didn't fight for money. They fought for meaning. They carried 2 swords, one long, one short. The long for battle, the short for the moment they failed. Because every warrior lived under one unspoken truth: if I am not honorable, I do not deserve to live. Their armor was heavy, but not half as heavy as the expectations. They were expected to be poets and killers, philosophers and executioners, gentle to the weak and merciless to the enemy. Every samurai walked with death beside him, not as an enemy, but as an old friend. It was said, when you see the shadow of death at sunrise, bow to it, for it walks with you. But beneath all that beauty, there was terror. A single wrong glance could cost your life. If your lord thought your expression was disrespectful, your career and head could end before sunset. If you were too proud, you'd be punished. Too humble, punished again. It was a life balanced on the edge of a blade. Many samurai didn't die in battle. They died from honor itself, from the unbearable weight of their own code. The same discipline that built Japan's order also built its. Silence. A silence so deep it could drown a man's heart. When the Western world finally arrived, the Americans with their steamships, the Europeans with their guns, they couldn't understand how these men lived and died for something invisible. They called them fanatics. But to the samurai, dying for honor was the only freedom they ever knew. Because in a world where everything, your class, your fate, your breath, was decided by birth, the only thing you could still control was how you faced death. The peasant's burden, life in the mud and chains. Hey guys, imagine this. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you're already awake. The air is cold, wet with dew, and you can smell the earth before you even step outside. Your hands ache from yesterday. Your back feels like stone. And before the first light even touches the horizon, you're already standing ankle deep in mud. Because in feudal Japan, being born a peasant wasn't just a condition, it was a life sentence. In the grand, poetic order of Japanese society, samurai held honor, nobles held power, merchants held wealth, and peasants held the weight of the entire country on their bent, bleeding backs. They were the spine of Japan. But never the face of it. Every bowl of rice a samurai ate came from their hands. Every war fought, every tea ceremony held, Every castle built was because peasants kept the fields alive. But no one thanked them. Not once. You wake before dawn, not because you choose to, but because your lord's tax collector will arrive at sunrise. He'll measure the rice you've harvested. He'll take what's due to the empire, and if you hide even one sack, even a handful, you'll be beaten, maybe executed. The rules were clear. The rice you grow isn't yours. The life you live isn't yours. You exist to feed the system. The mud doesn't care who you are. It swallows your feet the same way it swallows your hope. You work barefoot, with a straw hat against the sun and rain, and your reflection in the water looks older than you are. You're 25, but you look 40. You're 40, but you feel 100. Generations before you did the same, and generations after you will, too. This is the rhythm of peasant life, a song of obedience and exhaustion. When the sun finally rises, it's both a blessing and a curse. It means light to work by, but also more heat to suffer under. You plant, you weed, you harvest, you bow. Every movement measured, efficient, practiced. The same motion your father used, and his father before him. A living inheritance of pain. There's no reward for hard work here. A good harvest doesn't bring joy. It brings attention. If your land yields too much, your taxes go up. If you yield too little, you're accused of laziness or deceit. Either way, you lose. Either way, you bow. And when tax season ends, famine begins. If the rains don't come, your fields crack. If they come too much, they flood. If the locusts arrive, they devour everything. You pray to gods you don't understand, in shrines made of straw and fear. You leave offerings, rice you can't spare, incense you can't afford. Because when the harvest dies, you die too. The government didn't see peasants as people. They saw them as numbers on scrolls. Every peasant household was registered, monitored, taxed. Every child born had a duty before they could speak. And travel? Forget it. Leaving your village without permission was a crime. A farmer in northern Japan could live and die without ever seeing the ocean, even if it was just a few miles away. They called it order. But for the peasants, it was a cage built from rice stalks and fear. In this world, even your appearance had limits. Peasants couldn't wear silk. They couldn't own swords. They couldn't read or write unless their lord allowed it. They couldn't even change their hairstyle if it resembled that of a samurai. And if they dared to defy these unwritten rules, punishment was swift and public, a warning to others who might start dreaming too loudly. Yet somehow, in the cracks of this suffocating life, beauty survived. At night, after the fields fell silent and the crickets began to sing, peasants would gather around a small fire. Someone would play a flute made of bamboo. Children would chase each other barefoot through the smoke. An old woman would tell stories of mountain spirits, of fox gods, of brave warriors who fell in love with the moon. For a moment, laughter would return, soft, fragile, fleeting. Because laughter here wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Still, the cruelty never left. When famine struck hard, peasants were often forced to eat grass, bark, or clay to stay alive. In some dark winters, parents abandoned infants in the forest rather than watch them starve. They wept as they walked away. But the system never wept with them. Their pain wasn't recorded. Their names forgotten. Every season was a test, and every test was unfair. In the spring, they planted. In the summer, they endured. In the autumn, they paid. In the winter, they waited to suffer again, year after year, lifetime after lifetime. A peasant's rebellion didn't come with swords or fire. It came with endurance. It came with silent defiance. The act of staying alive when the world said you shouldn't. And yet, even among all this, there were whispers. Whispers of hope. Of a samurai who had fallen in love with a farmer's daughter. Of a lord who secretly fed his peasants during famine. Of a village that hid its grain from the collectors and survived another year. Tiny sparks in a dark universe. Proof that humanity can breathe even under tyranny. When Westerners first heard about Japanese peasants centuries later, they marveled at their discipline. They called them the most obedient people on earth. But obedience wasn't pride, it was armor. Because if you couldn't escape your pain, the only way to survive it was to make it sacred. That was the secret of the Japanese peasant. They didn't fight the mud. They became it. They learned to bend, to endure, to let their suffering bloom quietly. like the rice they planted. And every time the wind brushed across the paddies, it carried their stories, stories the lords never read. The emperors never heard, but that built Japan's beating heart. The samurai fought for honor. The nobles ruled for glory. But the peasants, they carried Japan on their shoulders, and no one ever said thank you. Their backs were bent, but their spirits never broke. They lived in chains, but their hearts were free. That was the peasant's burden, the quiet, endless, muddy miracle that kept Japan alive. Women in shadows, the silent strength of Japanese women. Dawn is breaking over a village in feudal Japan. Mist clings to the rice paddies, the mountains loom in silence, and somewhere, the first crow caws. Inside a small thatched hut, a woman rises. She does not stretch or yawn. She does not think of herself. She moves as she has always moved, with a quiet precision that has been drilled into her since birth. Every step she takes, every motion of her hands, every fold of her kimono, carries centuries of expectation. This is the world of feudal Japanese women. And make no mistake, it is beautiful, elegant, and unrelentingly cruel. From the moment a girl was born, her fate was sealed. She did not inherit land, a sword, or the right to choose her path. Her body, her mind, her heart, all belonged to her father, her future husband, and the societal codes that had been written long before her birth. Freedom? A word that existed only in whispers. Joy? A luxury often denied. Her world was a narrow corridor of duty, ritual, and silence. If she was born into a samurai family, her life meant training in perfection. Not martial perfection, though many noble daughters learned archery or sword forms, but perfection in behavior, posture, and presence. Every bow had to be measured, every word carefully chosen, every glance polite, graceful, and controlled. She learned early that a single gesture of disrespect could ripple through her family's honor, staining her lineage for generations. Marriages were not about love, but alliances. A daughter's hand was a political instrument, a tool to strengthen bonds between clans or cement loyalty. The woman had no choice in the matter. To resist was unthinkable, dangerous. To obey was survival. She wore her obedience like armor, hiding any spark of personal desire beneath layers of kimono and cultivated serenity. Even daily life was an intricate performance. Bathing was ritualized, not optional. In winter, girls and women would wash in ice-cold water, muscles stiff and lips blue, the steam rising as a silent witness to their resilience. They scrubbed, they polished, they arranged their hair in towering styles that could take hours to maintain, all while performing chores. Pounding rice, tending gardens, or overseeing younger siblings. Every movement reflected discipline. Every detail mattered. To appear unkempt was to invite shame, the invisible poison that could seep through a woman's entire existence. And the expectations did not stop at cleanliness or posture. Women were also the keepers of culture, the silent educators of future samurai and citizens. They memorized poetry, mastered calligraphy, learned tea ceremony etiquette, and understood the subtleties of music and dance. Yet, all this knowledge was a secret strength. It was power contained within a cage. Because no matter how skilled, how clever, how beautiful, the society around her could strip all recognition away in an instant. Imagine a young woman in a village home. Her day starts before the sun, pounding rice into flour, carrying water from a distant stream, tending to animals, sweeping floors, and cooking over a smoky hearth. Her hands are cracked, her back bent, and yet she moves with the precision of someone performing a sacred ritual. There is no applause, no reward. The world does not see her labor. It only sees the result, a clean house, food on the table, and a daughter ready to be married into another clan. And when she marries, her life changes, but only in ownership. Her father's authority transfers to her husband's family. She leaves her childhood home, her parents, her siblings, and steps into a new cage, one where she must navigate unknown masters, in-laws, and hierarchies. Obedience becomes survival. Every word spoken, every action performed, is weighed, measured, and judged. Yet, within this rigid structure, women developed extraordinary resilience. They became masters of influence. quietly shaping the lives of their husbands, children, and servants. They could move events with a single phrase, sway decisions with subtle gestures, and communicate volumes in a glance. It was subtle, invisible power, like a shadow bending the sunlight. The samurai may have held the sword, the lords the law, but women held the pulse of the household. And in Japan, the household was society itself. The contrast is staggering. Samurai daughters learned to dance in heavy silk while pounding rice in the courtyard. Peasant women, barefoot in mud, bore children with smiles masked in stoicism. Both performed labor. Both endured cruelty, both obeyed, and both cultivated dignity. Under crushing pressure, the upper-class women practiced etiquette, the lower-class women practiced endurance. But in both cases, their existence was defined by service and survival. In literature and letters, we glimpse their thoughts, rarely their names. Women wrote poems in secret, expressing grief, love, and longing, their words tucked into drawers or buried in family scrolls. A daughter mourning a brother lost in battle, a wife longing for her husband's safe return, a mother watching her children bend beneath impossible workloads. These were lives lived intensely, silently, invisibly. The pain they endured was both physical and psychological, often invisible to outsiders, yet ever present in the shaping of society. And even in suffering, there was ritual. Childbirth, illness, death, each was navigated with strict codes, blending endurance with ceremony. A mother who lost a child might grieve quietly, performing every household task before anyone noticed her tears. A young woman might conceal bruises, injuries, or exhaustion behind a serene expression. In a society obsessed with honor, to display weakness was deadly. Yet the strength required to mask it, day after day, was monumental. Perhaps the most striking element of this hidden world was expectation versus reality. Women were expected to embody cherry blossoms, delicate, fragrant, fleeting, yet to survive, they needed the endurance of stone, the cunning of foxes, and the patience of rivers. Every smile contained discipline. Every gesture was calculated. Even laughter had rules. The world demanded beauty and compliance, and yet rewarded either. It's easy to underestimate these women. They never fought in open battle. They didn't carry swords in the streets or ride into wars. But make no mistake, the battlefield of their lives was everywhere. In the kitchens, the fields, the tatami rooms, and the shadows of corridors. In navigating rules designed to trap them, in influencing the men around them without words. In silently preserving family honor while sacrificing their own desires, they fought every day, and often they survived where men perished. Western audiences may marvel at the samurai code, the honor of warriors, the poetry of death. But in truth, the silent courage of Japanese women shaped the backbone of society. They were the invisible anchors of homes, villages, and generations. While men faced the battlefield, women faced the weight of expectations multiplied by centuries of tradition, and they endured, every day, every hour, every breath. And there were moments of quiet rebellion. A girl teaching a younger sibling to read, defying rules in secret. A wife managing household resources cleverly, stretching rice and oil to prevent hunger. A mother hiding small joys in children's lives, carving moments of play in the middle of unending labor. Small sparks, tiny resistances, nothing explosive, nothing that history would record in bold letters. But enough to keep spirit alive. So, when you think of feudal Japan, don't just imagine swords, armor, and battles. Think of the women who bore the weight of civilization quietly, whose beauty and suffering shaped the rhythm of daily life. They were the true keepers of the flame. The silent strength, the hidden backbone. Every bamboo wall, every rice paddy, every polished floor reflects the hands of women who endured, adapted, and survived. And yet, their stories often remain shadows, whispered only in the margins of history. The untouchables, Ada and Heinen, ghosts of feudal Japan. Imagine walking through a village at dawn. Mist hangs low over the ground, the smell of wet earth mixing with smoke from early fires. In one corner, a group of people moves silently. Not warriors, not nobles, not merchants, but people everyone else pretends don't exist. They are the Ada and Heinen, the untouchables of feudal Japan. To understand their world, you have to forget everything you think you know about society, fairness, or morality. Because in this society, these people were legally and socially invisible, and yet they performed the tasks that made civilization possible. The Ada handled death. They butchered animals for meat, tanned leather, cleaned blood, and buried the dead. The Heinen worked with the most despised jobs, cleaning sewers, disposing of human waste, and surviving in the margins of society. Everyone needed them, yet everyone avoided them. Imagine the daily life of a person whose existence itself is considered pollution. Wherever they went, the air changed. Whispers followed them. Children were taught to cross the street when they passed. Even law rarely touched them, except to punish. These were humans stripped to essentials. They wore coarse clothes, lived in separate villages, and were barred from temples, schools, and markets. Touching a noble, a samurai, or even a merchant accidentally could result in public humiliation or violent reprisal. They were always visible, yet invisible. Crucial to survival, yet unwanted. The Ada worked with animal hides. Imagine the smell, the blood, the flies. Every day, they faced decay, disease, and contempt. Yet their work allowed samurai to wear armor, merchants to sell shoes and gloves, and the emperor to walk without seeing the dead under his feet. Every blade, every belt, every leather pouch, a product of invisible labor, performed by people society wanted to erase. And then the Heinen, the non-human. They scavenged the streets, cleaned waste, and did the dirty work no one else would touch. In some villages, Heinen were forced to live outside town boundaries, in small huts or caves. Rain, snow, disease, everything that fell on society fell on them first. Yet they survived, not because they were protected, but because they had no choice. Imagine that level of social invisibility. To exist while being forbidden from participating in life as everyone else knows it. Birth determined this fate. No hope, no choice. And it didn't stop with one generation. Their children inherited the stigma. Their grandchildren knew nothing but chains invisible to outsiders. Despite this, the untouchables created their own communities. They had their rituals, their festivals, their stories. They laughed, they cried, they loved. Humanity, no matter how oppressed, finds a way to persist. But the risk was ever present. A single misstep, accidental contact with a samurai or merchant, could bring violence. Punishment was public, shame was codified. Death was not uncommon. It is easy for us, in the 21st century, to look back and feel horror. But in their time, this was order. This was society. And like everyone else, the untouchables learned to survive under it. They moved like shadows, worked like ghosts, and endured what most people could not imagine. One of the cruel ironies of their lives was that their work was necessary. Feudal Japan could not function without them. The samurai could not fight without armor. The merchants could not sell goods without leather. And yet, the moment they stepped into sunlight among others, they were treated as if they had no right to exist. Invisibility was both punishment and protection. To be seen was to be endangered. To be ignored was survival. Even their cultural contributions were hidden. They created tools, repaired armor, maintained infrastructure, and processed hides that became art. Many samurai admired the durability of the leather and craftsmanship of tools, never knowing or acknowledging the people who made them. In this way, the untouchables shaped Japan silently, invisibly, indispensably. And their struggles were compounded by nature itself. They lived in the coldest parts of villages, exposed to the elements, disease, and famine. Rain turned their homes to mud. Winter froze their water. Summer brought insects and illness. Yet they endured, generation after generation, because resistance wasn't a choice, survival was. Imagine being invisible in every social, religious, and political sense. Yet every family relied on your labor to eat, wear clothes, and live safely. It's a paradox that defines human society's cruelty, dependence without acknowledgement. The untouchables were the backbone of Japan's daily life, but their stories rarely reached history books. And yet they were not powerless. They formed secret networks, protected their children, and preserved knowledge in their own ways. A leatherworker taught apprentices in hidden workshops. A scavenger shared maps of safe paths through town alleys. Survival itself became a quiet, defiant rebellion. Western travelers arriving in Japan centuries later would note these people. They described them as invisible, miserable, and necessary. But the untouchables were more than that. They were resilient, ingenious, alive despite the world insisting they weren't. The merchant's paradox: wealth without respect. In the bustling streets of feudal Japan, lanterns swayed gently above narrow wooden alleys. The scent of roasted rice, smoke from kitchens, and the faint tang of river water filled the air. Merchants moved among the townsfolk, carrying bundles of goods, carefully balancing their precious coins. To a modern observer, they seemed fortunate, wealth in their hands, opportunity at their fingertips. But beneath the surface, their lives were tangled in a paradox as sharp as a samurai's blade: wealth without respect. Being a merchant in feudal Japan was like walking on ice over a deep, dark lake. You had money, but society despised you. Why? Because wealth wasn't earned through labor in the eyes of the elite. Merchants sold what others produced. They traded rice, silk, and tools crafted by peasants. They counted coins instead of calling sweat their own. And in a society obsessed with hierarchy, this made them morally suspect. Imagine running a shop where every transaction is measured not by profit, but by how the ruling samurai and peasants perceive your integrity. Sell too aggressively, and you are greedy. Charge too little, and you are incompetent. Accumulate wealth, and the elite whispers behind silk screens question your character. In Japan, money was power, but only socially meaningless power. Daily life for a merchant was an endless balancing act. Storefronts were small but bustling. You had to manage inventory, navigate complex taxes, and obey local laws, which could change with the mood of the lord or the arrival of a traveling inspector. Every misstep could destroy your livelihood. Stealing from a client was punishable, but cheating a peasant? Even a slight accusation could lead to public humiliation, fines, or imprisonment. It was a world where risk lurked behind every exchange. Yet merchants were indispensable. The economy relied on them. Without them, samurai could not trade surplus rice for tools. Peasants could not convert their harvest into money to pay taxes. The entire flow of goods, wealth, and survival depended on their careful management. And still, they were denied status, honor, and recognition. Consider a merchant living in Edo, the capital bustling with thousands. By day, he negotiated trades, bought silk from artisans, and sold spices imported from distant lands. By night, he returned home, tired but careful. His posture had to remain humble in front of samurai, who could dismiss him with a wave of a hand. If he dared to sit too comfortably, or laugh too loudly, he risked social scorn. Money could not shield him from humiliation. Coins could fill pockets but not hearts. Merchants also faced another cruel paradox. They could amass wealth for generations, yet remain at the bottom of the social ladder. A peasant could never rise to wealth without permission. A samurai could never lose status without dishonor. But a merchant? He could accumulate gold, land, and influence, and still be considered inferior. The system was designed to keep them in a cage, one gilded in opportunity, yet cold in respect. Beyond commerce, merchants were expected to understand etiquette, religion, and social customs. Hosting a dinner for visiting samurai required meticulous planning, bowls arranged precisely, tea prepared with ritual precision, seating reflecting subtle hierarchies. A single misstep could spark offense, shattering business ties and reputation. Every action was scrutinized, every gesture measured. The merchant's world was a labyrinth where failure was both public and unforgiving. Yet, within these strict confines, they found cunning and creativity. Merchants learned to manipulate the system subtly. They formed secret networks of trade, information, and alliances. Hidden partnerships flourished beneath the eyes of authorities. Coins passed hands in silent agreements that ensured survival and prosperity. This was the shadow economy of Japan, thriving quietly, yet never escaping moral judgment. Merchants also bore the brunt of taxation, disproportionately higher than peasants. While samurai lived off stipends and land, merchants paid in coin, constantly evaluated for fairness and loyalty. Taxes could rise unexpectedly, leaving families in debt or despair. A single failed venture could ruin a household, erase years of effort, and bring shame upon the family name, even though they had done nothing wrong in moral terms. Family life for a merchant was another battlefield. Children were trained early to manage books, trade, and etiquette. Sons often inherited shops, daughters married strategically to form alliances. Every generation was a continuation of careful calculation, another step in climbing the social ladder that never truly existed. Love was transactional. Survival was obligatory. Ambition was limited by society's refusal to grant respect, regardless of success. Despite these constraints, merchants became innovators, driving commerce, culture, and technology. They funded festivals, commissioned art, and enabled trade routes that connected villages, provinces, and even foreign lands. Without them, samurai armor would not gleam, tea ceremonies would lack rare ingredients, and society itself would stall. They were the hidden engine of Japan's wealth, invisible in honor, but undeniable in influence. Their paradox, however, never faded. They held coins yet bowed to those with swords. They could amass power quietly, yet live beneath moral suspicion. They traded life itself for profit, but profit could not buy dignity. Money made them essential, but society made them invisible. This delicate balance shaped Japanese towns. Streets teemed with merchants, their voices shouting over each other in a cacophony of life. Yet all movements choreographed by invisible hierarchies. A merchant could be rich enough to fund festivals, save villages from famine, or influence politics quietly. Yet he remained socially inferior to even a poorly skilled samurai with an empty purse. History often remembers warriors, samurai, and lords. But the truth? The merchants were the veins carrying life through the body of Japan. They were silent strategists, economic lifelines, cultural patrons. Yet every step they took in their gilded cage reminded them that wealth alone could not grant respect. In the West, wealth is power. In feudal Japan, it was a burden. And this paradox defined generations of merchants, shaping their ingenuity, patience, and resilience. They learned to survive a world that rewarded labor in blood and honor in steel, but mistrusted the coins that funded it all. The merchant's life was not glamorous. It was not celebrated in poetry or swordplay. It was quiet, tactical, relentless. A test of endurance against invisible rules, societal prejudice, and the constant reminder that money could buy nothing of real esteem. And yet, they endured. They thrived. They shaped history quietly, imperceptibly, invisibly. They were both indispensable and disregarded, wealthy but humiliated, respected by necessity, scorned by tradition. The merchant's paradox, essential to the world, yet never allowed to fully stand in it. That was the life of the merchant in feudal Japan. A world of wealth, commerce, and unacknowledged genius, beautiful, tragic, and infinitely complex. The samurai's training, discipline, art, and death, the morning. Mist rolls over the mountains, and the first light touches the polished blades stacked in neat rows. A young boy stands barefoot on the cold wooden floor of a dojo. His back is straight, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the master who watches silently. Every breath he takes is measured. Every heartbeat is disciplined. Here, in feudal Japan, being born a samurai isn't a gift, it is a lifelong sentence. From the moment a child enters a samurai household, freedom is no longer a choice. His life is governed by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code written not only in laws but in the bones of his ancestors. Honor, loyalty, courage, and self-discipline are drilled into him until they are instinct, until they become the rhythm of his very being. The training begins before sunrise. The boy rises, washes in icy water that stings like needles across his skin, and dresses in layered robes that chafe against his flesh. Breakfast is simple: rice porridge, maybe a piece of pickled vegetable, but he eats it not for pleasure, only to fuel the day of unceasing drills and preparation. The dojo is cold in winter, sunless in the narrow alleys of the castle grounds. And yet the child stands, every muscle tense, waiting to receive the first lesson. Swordsmanship comes first. The katana is not a toy, not a symbol of glory. It is an extension of the body, the soul, and the honor of one's ancestors. Every strike must be perfect, every stance disciplined. Every motion a silent homage to centuries of warriors who died so that their name would live. Archery follows. The bow is heavy, the string unforgiving. Arrows hiss through the air, each one aimed not at a target, but at the boy's own hesitation, doubt, and imperfection. Miss once, and the instructor's gaze will burn into your spine. Miss twice, and the shame becomes visible, etched into your posture, your expression, your very essence. The lessons are relentless. Failure is never forgotten. Horseback riding comes next. The warrior learns to move with the animal as though he were born from it. The reins are tight in his hands. His legs grip the horse's flanks. Every gallop, every leap. Every maneuver must be executed flawlessly, because a samurai on horseback who falters is a samurai whose life is at risk, and whose lord's honor is imperiled. Even when the physical training ends, the discipline does not. Calligraphy, poetry, and strategy are equally vital. A samurai must think as a scholar, act as a warrior, and conduct himself as a noble. A poorly written letter could insult a lord. A misread strategy could cost an army. Every aspect of life, no matter how subtle, is an opportunity for dishonor or perfection, and the greatest lesson of all is in restraint. The samurai learns to control every impulse. To laugh at the wrong time is shameful. To show fear is shameful. To question a superior, or even glance inappropriately, is shameful. The discipline demanded of him is suffocating, relentless, and precise. His entire life is measured against the invisible line of honor, and crossing it even slightly can have deadly consequences. Dishonor is a tangible threat. If a samurai fails catastrophically, there is no escape from responsibility. The ritual of seppuku, the ceremonial suicide, is both punishment and preservation. He kneels, blade in hand, body poised in precision, and with one motion, he restores honor through pain. The process is formal, chillingly elegant, and final. Failure is not just personal, it stains the family name, the clan, the lineage. Even when the boy is not training, he is practicing vigilance. Walking through castle corridors, he bows with perfect posture. Eating, he holds himself with meticulous care. Sitting, he folds his robes precisely. Standing, he aligns his gaze. Every action is judged by lords, by teachers, by himself, and by the long shadows of ancestors who expect nothing less than absolute obedience. Yet the life of a samurai is not only punishment. There is profound beauty hidden in the rigor. The way the sunlight glints off a polished blade. The rhythm of arrows leaving the bow. The quiet precision of a poem inked in black on white paper. In this life, discipline itself becomes art, and art itself becomes survival. A samurai's family life is similarly regimented. Children are trained early, wives are educated to maintain grace and influence, and elders are honored with silent devotion. Even love is measured, controlled, disciplined. There is little room for indulgence, and yet every choice, every gesture, every ritual carries profound meaning. Traveling the land, a samurai sees the world differently. He notices the subtle shift of light on a rice paddy, the perfect curve of a blossom, the exact weight of snow on a rooftop. Because the discipline drilled into him forces attention to detail. The world is both more beautiful and more terrifying. For he sees the consequences of failure everywhere. And in battle, all this preparation matters. Every muscle, every thought, every moment of hesitation or confidence can decide life or death. The samurai's mind and body are one, a living weapon sharpened by years of routine, ritual, and training. There is glory, but glory is fleeting. Discipline is eternal. Even outside the battlefield, the samurai's life is a continuous test of endurance. Every ceremony, every festival, every interaction is another lesson in patience, precision, and loyalty. Clothes must be immaculate. Swords must be spotless. Words must be carefully chosen. There is no room for carelessness. One moment of negligence can lead to disaster, humiliation, or death, And yet, in the midst of this rigid structure, the samurai discovers profound freedom. A freedom found not in choice, but in mastery. To control one's body, mind, and honor completely is to claim a kind of immortality. The boy, now a man, understands that while society imposes rules, these rules can shape greatness. Pain becomes wisdom. Fear becomes preparation. Duty becomes art. This is the paradox of the samurai's training. Life is both beautiful and unforgiving, rewarding and lethal, disciplined and liberating. Every day is a struggle, every action a performance, every moment a test. But through the struggle comes mastery, not just of arms, but of self. The young samurai grows, each scar, each bruise, each sleepless night etching lessons into his being. And in the quiet moments, watching the sunset over the mountains, hearing the wind through bamboo, seeing the reflection of his blade in a still pond, he understands the truth of Bushido. Honor is not given. It is carved from the soul. And life is a canvas painted with the brush of discipline. That was the life of the samurai in training, beautiful, harrowing, perfectly precise. A life where every breath, every motion, and every thought is a choice dictated by honor, duty, and survival. The rituals of death, seppuku, honor, and legacy. The sun dips low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the castle grounds. A hush falls over the courtyard, broken only by the whisper of wind through the bamboo. In the center, a samurai kneels, his robe perfectly aligned, hands resting on the hilt of a short blade. Around him, witnesses stand silently, their eyes heavy with anticipation, their breaths held in reverence and dread. This is seppuku, ritual suicide, the ultimate act of honor in feudal Japan. From birth, a samurai is trained not only in life but in the inevitability of death. His education, his swordsmanship, his poetry, his very posture, all are shaped by the knowledge that failure is mortal. Seppuku is not a punishment imposed externally alone, it is a cultural expectation, a codified escape from dishonor, a way to reclaim dignity when all else is lost. The ritual is precise. A mat is laid out, inkstone and brush at hand for the samurai's final words, often a poem capturing life's fleeting beauty or expressing loyalty to lord and ancestors. The blade is examined, sharp and gleaming, resting on a cloth. Silence weighs heavy. The only sound is the rustle of robes and the occasional distant crow. Guests, often fellow samurai, retain perfect composure, for showing emotion in this moment would be dishonor. Seppuku is not a spectacle of panic. It is an act of calculated courage. The samurai approaches his fate as he approaches the battlefield, with discipline, precision, and unwavering commitment. Every movement is intentional, every breath measured. This is the paradox of death in feudal Japan, brutal, final, yet imbued with elegance, ritual, and reverence. For those outside the warrior class, such a ritual seems alien, incomprehensible. But within the framework of Bushido, it is the ultimate assertion of control over life, honor, and legacy. To die without dishonor is to maintain the family's reputation, to protect one's lord from shame, and to ensure that history remembers the samurai not for failure but for courage. Consider a samurai who has lost a duel, or failed to defend his lord's property. The shame would linger not only in his life but in the lives of his descendants. Seppuku becomes a way to halt the spread of dishonor, a final act that transforms personal defeat into cultural symbolism. His blood stains the earth, yes, but it also writes a story of bravery, loyalty, and precision that will echo through generations. The procedure itself is harrowing. The samurai opens his robe, revealing the torso where the blade will strike. He composes himself. A poem may be scrawled with trembling yet controlled hands, a farewell to life and a testament to duty. Every spectator knows their role: to witness, to uphold the sanctity of the act, and to intervene only at the exact, correct moment if the samurai hesitates. This is where the kaishakunin enters, a trusted second, often a close friend or disciple, whose task is to deliver a swift blow to end suffering the instant the samurai fulfills the first motion. Timing is critical. Too early, and it would strip the samurai of the final dignity of the act. Too late, and agony could stretch unbearably. Every detail is deliberate, every gesture ceremonial. Seppuku is more than death. It is a lesson etched into society. The practice reinforces the values of Bushido: courage, precision, loyalty, and honor above all else. A single ritual shapes the consciousness of an entire community. The spectators internalize the fear, the respect, the understanding that life is precious but honor is paramount. It is a society in which moral codes are inseparable from mortality. For a Western audience, it may appear extreme, almost surreal. But feudal Japan functioned in extremes. Life and death were intertwined with daily existence, and ritual made the incomprehensible meaningful. Samurai carried the knowledge that every failure could demand the ultimate price, yet this pressure also sculpted their precision, their art, their poetry, and their courage. Death was neither chaotic nor accidental. It was disciplined, as meticulous as the swing of a sword or the stroke of a brush. Even outside the battlefield or dojo, the shadow of seppuku influenced every aspect of life. Words were chosen carefully, gestures measured, and loyalty constantly demonstrated. A samurai's interactions with his family, his lord, and his peers were guided by the ever-present awareness of mortality and honor. Every decision carried weight. Every failure, no matter how minor, could ripple into catastrophe. And in this world, seppuku was the final punctuation mark, an act of ultimate responsibility. The psychological toll was immense. To grow up knowing that a single mistake could demand ritual death shapes a person in ways most modern societies cannot imagine. Fear and courage coexisted in every motion. Discipline was absolute. Even joy was tempered by awareness. And yet, through this relentless pressure, the samurai cultivated a depth of character, resilience, and artistry unmatched anywhere else. For the family of the samurai, seppuku was also a trial. Witnessing the ritual demanded stoicism, reverence, and understanding. Emotions were buried beneath layers of cultural expectation. Mothers, wives, and siblings were expected to absorb grief silently, reflecting composure outwardly, lest shame mar the occasion. Children learned from these moments that honor transcends life itself. Seppuku was not reserved only for the noble warrior. Sometimes, it extended to retainers or even lords who faced public dishonor. In all cases, it reaffirmed the societal hierarchy and moral framework. Death was both punishment and preservation, fear and respect, horror and poetry, a testament to a culture that measured life not only by survival but by the integrity of the soul. Imagine a samurai completing his final act. The courtyard is silent. The wind rustles the leaves. The blood stains the mat. But the poem remains, a testament to loyalty, courage, and discipline. Observers bow and whisper, absorbing the lesson etched in both tragedy and beauty. And life continues. The rice paddies still need tending, the lords still command, the merchants still trade. But the ritual leaves a lasting imprint, shaping society's understanding of honor and mortality. In this way, death becomes a teacher. It teaches discipline, respect, and the weight of responsibility. It transforms individual failure into communal lesson. And it preserves the narrative of feudal Japan, a world where life was harsh, duty unrelenting, and honor worth dying for. Seppuku reminds us that beauty can coexist with terror, that discipline can coexist with fear, and that a society can elevate death into ritual art. The samurai did not merely face mortality, they orchestrated it, transforming it into a story of courage, legacy, and unyielding honor. That was the ritual of seppuku in feudal Japan. Harsh, poetic, merciless, and utterly defining of a culture where life was measured by the courage to meet death on one's own terms. Peasants, the backbone buried in mud and rice. Before the sun even rises, the villages stir. Mist clings to the rice paddies like a thick, damp blanket, and the distant crowing of roosters is barely audible over the soft murmur of water running through irrigation canals. Here, in the flatlands and valleys of feudal Japan, peasants awaken not to choice but to obligation. Their lives are bound by birth, soil, and the relentless demands of a society that considers them both indispensable and expendable. A peasant's day begins with the cold, wet touch of dawn. There is no ceremonial washing, no moment of reflection, just a bite of ice-cold water from a well, splashed over weary arms and mud-stained faces. Clothes, rough and scratchy, are donned quickly. Breakfast is a simple bowl of rice porridge, occasionally accompanied by pickled vegetables, sometimes nothing at all if stores have run low or the taxes have been particularly harsh. Hunger is normalized, expected, and endured, and then it is into the mud-soaked rice fields, from sunrise until the sun leans toward the horizon. Knees sink into the soil. Hands tear at the stalks. Every movement is repetitive, rhythmic, and exhausting. Hours stretch on in an unbroken blur of labor. Sweat, rain, and dirt mix into a grimy uniform. The peasant's hands, calloused and scarred, tell the story of a life lived beneath the sky, under the eyes of lords who measure loyalty by yield. Not well-being. Feudal Japan's tax system is merciless. The rice harvested from these muddy fields does not belong entirely to the peasant. A portion, often the majority, is claimed by the daimyo, the lord of the land. Failure to produce enough could result in punishment, fines, beatings, or even imprisonment. Sometimes, families starve while the rice travels to the lord's kitchens, their hard work sustaining a society that does not acknowledge their humanity. The labor is unending, but the consequences of missteps are acute. If a peasant hides rice to survive famine, he commits treason. If he falters in his work, the village elders or local enforcers may punish him harshly. Mistakes are never private. Shame is public, absolute, and enduring. Life is dictated by duty, yet survival itself is uncertain. Peasant society is not uniform. There are artisans, fishermen, and minor landholders, but the vast majority are farmers, tied to the soil in a rigid hierarchy. They marry whom they are told, live where they are told, and follow a rhythm that has been repeated for generations. Freedom is a concept as distant as the mountains beyond the horizon. They do not own the land they work, the water they irrigate, or often even the roof over their heads. Daily life is punctuated by labor and punctuated again by vigilance. Peasants must be alert to the seasons, to rainfall, to pests, and to disease. One failed harvest could mean death. One miscalculated payment could spell ruin. And yet, there is resilience woven into their existence. Families work together. Villagers share knowledge. Communities bind together against the harsh realities of feudal life. Even moments of reprieve carry their own burdens. Festivals and rituals exist, but participation is still controlled by social hierarchy. The peasants may dance, sing, and pray, yet every gesture is framed by obedience. Even joy is measured, carefully circumscribed by class and duty. The world of a peasant is beautiful in its rhythm but punishing in its constraints. Hygiene, like everything else, is a luxury dictated by circumstance. Cold rivers and wells provide limited washing. Clothes are aired, scrubbed, and patched repeatedly. Teeth are cleaned with twigs or salt. The rituals of the samurai and wealthy merchants are impossible here. Yet, even under extreme hardship, cleanliness is pursued with devotion. Dirt is not merely a nuisance, it is shame, spiritually and socially. Children learn quickly. By the age of 6 or 7, they work in the fields. By 10, they can carry water, plant rice, and follow the exacting patterns demanded by the Lord. Play is fleeting, learning survival is paramount. Education is limited, literacy rare, and imagination must always bow to necessity. Every generation repeats the cycles of labor and obligation, each child's path preordained by birth. Illness is common, medicine scarce, and mortality high. Seasonal floods, crop failure, or epidemics strike with devastating consequences. Yet peasants endure, finding small joys in community, family, and the fleeting beauty of nature. The cherry blossoms bloom, the river shimmers, and the mountains remain eternal, reminders that life persists even when it is harshest. Despite oppression, peasants were essential to the economy. Their labor produced the rice that fed towns, villages, and armies. They harvested the raw materials that merchants traded and artisans transformed. Without peasants, samurai would go hungry, castles would fall silent, and society itself would collapse. They were the hidden backbone of feudal Japan, invisible in status, but foundational in existence. Social mobility was nearly impossible. Marriage, property, and trade were tightly controlled by the feudal system. Any attempt to rise above one's class could result in severe punishment. Peasants accepted this not because they approved, but because survival required compliance. Resistance was rare, dangerous, and often fatal. Their lives were a constant negotiation with authority, a balance between endurance and fear. Yet, within the mud and toil, humanity thrived. Songs were sung during planting and harvest. Stories were whispered by fires at night. Families found intimacy, love, and comfort in each other. Their laughter, sorrow, and hope formed a quiet culture resilient to the grinding pressures of society. Even the harshest world cannot completely erase the human spirit. Imagine standing in a field at dawn. The air is cold, heavy with mist. Workers kneel in mud, bending over rice paddies, their backs straight despite exhaustion. Their eyes are focused, their hands skilled, their movements rhythmic. They are invisible to the lords and warriors who benefit from their toil. Yet their work sustains the empire. They are essential, uncelebrated, and enduring. Peasants lived, and died, and repeated the cycle. Generations passed in mud, rice, and toil. Their lives were harsh, unglamorous, and often tragic. And yet it is their labor, their endurance, and their hidden strength that allowed the elegance, poetry, and honor of samurai culture to exist. They were the silent foundation beneath swords, silk, and temples. And so, when we think of feudal Japan, the blood, the honor, the swords, and the rituals, we must remember those who made it all possible. The samurai may have wielded the blade, and the merchants may have counted the coins, but it was the peasants who breathed life into the land, bore its burdens, and ensured that society could function. Their story is one of endurance, invisibility, and resilience, a reminder that even in the harshest of worlds, human spirit persists. That was the life of the peasants in feudal Japan, grueling, relentless, unrecognized, yet profoundly vital. The backbone buried in mud and rice, shaping history silently, generation after generation. Women of feudal Japan, grace, constraint, and power. The morning sun rises over a quiet village, casting long shadows across thatched roofs. In a small wooden house, a young woman kneels beside a brazier, warming water for washing rice. Her hands move with precision, practiced through countless repetitions, her body poised with a grace honed from childhood. In feudal Japan, a woman's life was preordained by birth, bound by rules, and defined by duty, yet within these constraints, there was a quiet, unspoken power. From the moment a girl was born, her path was written. She would marry as her parents arranged. She would obey her husband and his family. She would maintain the household with precision, manage servants if she had them, and care for children while adhering to the expectations of the larger clan. Freedom, as modern audiences understand it, did not exist. But within this rigid structure, women developed resilience, ingenuity, and influence in ways society rarely recognized. Daily life for women was a balancing act between service and survival. From the crack of dawn, they attended to chores, washing, cooking, maintaining household cleanliness, spinning thread, preparing meals, and ensuring that every aspect of the home reflected order, respect, and propriety. Their appearance, too, was a constant responsibility. Hair styled meticulously in intricate knots, skin cared for with natural oils, and garments aligned perfectly. The world demanded that women embody grace, even while performing backbreaking labor. Education for women varied by class. Elite women learned poetry, calligraphy, music, and the subtle art of conversation. Their training was not frivolous. A well-turned phrase or a perfectly composed poem could impress a visiting lord, solidify alliances, or preserve honor. In samurai households, women were trained to manage estates, understand the social hierarchy, and act as mediators when disputes arose. Intelligence, discretion, and grace became tools of influence, quietly shaping the family's fortunes and honor. Yet constraint was relentless. Marriages were rarely romantic, they were strategic. Love was secondary to duty. Obedience was not optional. A misstep could bring shame upon the entire household. Even small acts of defiance, a careless word, or a visible lapse in poise could ripple outward with social consequences. Life was measured in expectation, and failure to meet it could mean ostracism, punishment, or scandal. Within these strictures, however, women discovered hidden forms of power. They managed household finances, oversaw agricultural production, and directed servants. Elite women influenced political decisions through marriage, correspondence, and strategic counsel. Even among peasants, women guided daily life, preserved traditions, and ensured survival. Power was subtle, indirect, but profoundly effective, and it often passed unnoticed by the men around them. Motherhood added another layer of responsibility. Raising children was not simply a private joy but a civic duty. Girls were trained from a young age in etiquette and domestic skills, boys were instilled with discipline and loyalty. Women shaped the next generation of samurai, merchants, and peasants, embedding values, honor, and survival skills into children who would carry them through life. Their work was invisible yet essential. Women's lives were also interwoven with the spiritual and cultural fabric of society. They observed festivals, performed rituals, and maintained altars within homes. Religion offered both solace and social structure. Through prayer, offering, and ritual, women connected the household to the divine, sustaining spiritual balance even under extreme pressure. Despite societal limits, women found moments of agency. A well-timed word could avert a conflict. A discreet piece of advice could guide a household through peril. A sharp mind could navigate the complex social hierarchy, protecting children, property, and family honor. Their intelligence and emotional acuity often meant the survival of lineages, estates, and sometimes entire clans. Power was never overt, but it was quiet, resilient, and enduring. Life was never easy. Winters were cold, summers hot and humid. Meals were simple, clothing basic unless wealth allowed for luxury. Women endured labor equal to men, planting, harvesting, fetching water, grinding rice, yet their contributions were almost entirely invisible to society at large. Respect was rare, and recognition rarer still. Yet they persisted, shaping society quietly, persistently, and profoundly. Even beauty, so emphasized in culture, carried weight. A woman's scent, posture, and elegance were not for vanity. They were social tools, a language of discipline and respect. Smelling faintly of cherry blossoms, moving with restraint, maintaining perfect composure, these were requirements of survival and influence, not mere aesthetics. Some women, especially in warrior families, learned self-defense and swordsmanship. Others became skilled negotiators or advisors. Female monks or nuns engaged in spiritual leadership, guiding communities and preserving sacred knowledge. In every case, women navigated the rigid social framework to carve space for autonomy, resilience, and legacy. The paradox of women in feudal Japan mirrors that of the merchant, constrained yet powerful, overlooked yet essential. Society denied them freedom, yet relied upon their intelligence and skill. Their labor, domestic, agricultural, cultural, or spiritual, upheld the entire social structure. Without women, the samurai would lose heirs, peasants would lack guidance, merchants would lack management. And the rituals of daily life would collapse. As night falls, women continue their unseen labor. Fires burn low. Children sleep. Houses are tidied. Clothes hung to dry. A quiet moment may come, a reflection on a completed day, a whispered hope for tomorrow, a fleeting thought of beauty amid hardship. In these moments, strength and grace coexist, a testament to endurance under relentless social pressures. To outsiders, their world may appear oppressive, narrow, or unfair. But within this constraint lies profound resilience, subtle strategy, and enduring influence. Feudal Japanese women were architects of survival, guardians of culture, and quiet wielders of power. Their legacy is etched not in swords or coins but in the continuity, order, and dignity of society itself. That was the life of women in feudal Japan. Bound by rules, burdened with duty, yet immensely powerful in ways society rarely acknowledged. Grace, constraint, and influence intertwined, shaping the story of a civilization silently, tirelessly, and profoundly. Daily life and hygiene, rituals, ice-cold water, and bathing culture. The morning air is crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked grass and the distant murmurs of rivers winding through the valleys. In feudal Japan, the day begins not with leisure, but with ritual, discipline, and a confrontation with cold water. Cleanliness was sacred, a reflection of honor, spiritual balance, and societal expectation. And yet, it was also painful, exacting, and unyielding. In samurai households, the first light finds warriors and their families at the basin. Ice-cold water splashed over arms, face, and shoulders jolts the body awake. There is no negotiation, no comfort of modern plumbing. No fluffy towels. Each splash is a test of endurance, a small act of defiance against lethargy, a daily reminder that life rewards those who discipline their bodies and minds. Soap was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. When it existed, it was harsh, made from rice bran or ash, and carried the faint, unappealing odor of practicality. Fragrance, delicacy, and indulgence were secondary to the spiritual and social mandate. Being unclean was shameful, spiritually corrupt, and socially dangerous. A dirty hand, untrimmed nail, or grimy robe could insult the lord ancestors, or the discipline of the household. Communal bathhouses were rare but vital. Villages fortunate enough to have one transformed these spaces into the heart of hygiene and social life. Heated by firewood, steam rising through wooden beams, the bathhouse was a place where neighbors, relatives, and sometimes even landlords gathered, completely naked, stripped of pretense, yet bound by unspoken rules of etiquette. First came the scrubbing, vigorous and thorough, then soaking in steaming water, reflecting the belief that cleanliness was ritualized, not optional. For those far from communal baths, the struggle continued. Rivers, wells, and buckets became temporary solutions. Teeth were cleaned with twigs or salt, nails kept neat with improvised tools, and clothes were aired and scrubbed repeatedly. Even without modern convenience, the underlying principle remained: shame and social rejection were stronger motivators than comfort or habit. For women, the demands were even greater. Skin had to be maintained, hair styled in intricate knots that required hours of care, and posture refined to reflect discipline and grace. Every interaction, every movement, and even the scent carried by a woman was judged. A samurai's wife or daughter was expected to embody elegance while performing the relentless labor of household and family management. The samurai, too, lived under constant inspection. A lord might walk into a household at any moment, evaluating posture, cleanliness, attire, and personal grooming. A dirty fingernail could translate into dishonor. Wrinkled robes could signify carelessness. Body odor during a bow might be perceived as disrespect. Every motion, every detail of personal hygiene, was a reflection of loyalty and honor, the smallest imperfection carrying enormous consequences. Even children learned early. From their first years, they were taught to wash carefully, trim nails, and maintain clothing. Cleanliness became a daily discipline, instilled with the same rigor as swordsmanship or calligraphy. It was not merely about avoiding disease. It was about teaching responsibility, awareness, and respect for societal norms. The bathing rituals, though physically demanding, were also deeply meditative. The scalding steam, the cold splash, the precise scrubbing, each motion forced attention to detail, focus, and mindfulness. In these moments, one could reflect on duty, family, and personal conduct. Even in the simplest acts of hygiene, the samurai, women, and children were training the mind as much as the body. Rural areas presented even harsher conditions. Winter brought freezing water, bitter winds, and snow-laden fields. Bathing was a test of endurance and resilience. A family might heat a small cauldron of water over firewood, carefully rationing warmth, ensuring everyone washed thoroughly while conserving heat. The physical discomfort was intentional, reinforcing toughness and mental fortitude. Merchants, peasants, and samurai alike adhered to strict standards. Filth was socially intolerable. Even minor lapses could result in subtle ostracism or formal reprimand. Bathing culture was not optional. but a vital element of survival in the intricate web of feudal society. It was about honor, morality, and social cohesion. Hygiene extended beyond the body. Clothing was aired, folded, and repaired. Tatami mats were swept and dusted. Tools, weapons, and household items were maintained meticulously. Even personal possessions reflected one's discipline, social standing, and attention to ritual. Cleanliness, in every sense, was a measure of character. There was a poetic beauty to it all. Ice-cold water on shivering skin, steam rising in the dawn light, and the silence of concentrated effort created a ritualistic cadence to daily life. The act of cleansing was not merely functional, it was an embodiment of the cultural values of precision, respect, and endurance. The intensity of this discipline shaped every individual. A samurai's awareness of bodily maintenance, a woman's attention to presentation and ritual, a child's early education in hygiene, all contributed to a society where physical, moral, and social cleanliness were inseparable. The rewards were subtle but pervasive: respect, honor, and the ability to navigate an unforgiving world with grace. In this way, feudal Japan's daily life and hygiene were both brutal and beautiful. Icy water, repetitive labor, and relentless scrutiny might seem harsh, yet they reinforced the rhythm of society. They created warriors, disciplined citizens, and resilient families. They intertwined physical endurance with moral and social responsibility, making every day a test of body, mind, and honor. So when we imagine life in feudal Japan, we often picture swords, samurai, and battles. But the foundation was equally rooted in rituals of cleanliness, meticulous daily practice, and disciplined living. These routines molded individuals, maintained order, and ensured that society functioned with precision, dignity, and endurance. That was the life of daily hygiene and ritual in feudal Japan. Cold, exacting, and mercilessly disciplined, yet beautiful, meditative, and essential, shaping warriors, families, and communities with every splash of ice-cold water. The harsh punishments, laws, crime, and fear. The streets of a feudal village are quiet, almost too quiet. Shadows stretch across narrow alleyways, and the wind carries whispers of both the living and the dead. In feudal Japan, law is absolute, obedience mandatory, and punishment swift. Society is governed not merely by rules but by a fear that pierces the mind, bends the body, and disciplines the soul. For a samurai, honor is law. A single insult, a misstep in etiquette, or even an unintentional glance in the wrong direction could demand restitution, or worse, ritual death. For peasants and merchants, the law is relentless, inflexible, and unforgiving. Every coin taken without proper accounting, every misdelivered rice tax, every act of defiance, intentional or accidental, carries the weight of potential disaster. Imagine a farmer caught hiding a portion of his rice harvest. He had worked from dawn until sunset, fingers raw, back aching, hands caked with mud. And yet the law is clear: any attempt to preserve life beyond obligation is treason. Punishments range from beatings to public humiliation to death. The Lord's inspectors arrive unannounced, walking the fields with cold, calculating eyes, and the fear of discovery is constant, unrelenting. Crime is perceived not just as a violation of law, but as a threat to the social order. Theft, lying, or laziness is not only personal failure, it is a disruption to the delicate balance of hierarchy and duty. Peasants, often struggling to survive, live under this omnipresent fear. The smallest miscalculation can end in public display of suffering, dismemberment, or execution. Fear becomes a tool of governance, shaping behavior with psychological precision. Punishments are as varied as they are severe. Public beatings, tatami whipping, and forced labor were common. For more serious offenses, execution could be ceremonial, a reminder that law, honor, and social hierarchy are inseparable. Heads might roll for failure to comply with taxes or for speaking out of turn. Disobedience was a moral and spiritual failure as much as a legal one. Samurai, though respected, are not exempt. Their honor is fragile, and their failures visible. Losing a duel, insulting a superior, or failing in duty could result in seppuku, ritual suicide, administered not as vengeance but as a restoration of order. Life in feudal Japan is measured not by freedom or choice, but by adherence to rules whose consequences are immediate and absolute. For women, the laws are both subtle and omnipresent. A poorly maintained household, a lapse in etiquette, or failure to educate children properly could bring shame and punishment. Their missteps echo across the family, affecting husbands, children, and even distant relatives. In this society, crime is not always action, it can be inaction, negligence, or improper behavior. Even merchants are constrained. Overcharging, cheating, or failing to produce accurate accounts risks punishment from local authorities or samurai overseers. Merchants occupy a paradoxical position. Wealth grants power, yet moral suspicion shadows every transaction. To be shrewd in business is admirable, to be too efficient is threatening. The law, combined with social expectation, ensures constant vigilance. Punishments are designed to instill fear, reinforce obedience, and maintain social hierarchy. Public shaming was common, the offender displayed in the village square, hands bound, face exposed to whispers, mockery, and scorn. This is not merely cruelty, it is education for the community, a living lesson on the cost of defiance. Consider a child growing up in this society. Every misbehavior is observed. Every failure noted. Every minor mistake could result in punishment, not just for the individual, but as a lesson for the household and the village. Fear is internalized. Obedience becomes instinct. And through this relentless pressure, the population is molded into a disciplined, hierarchical, and compliant society. Yet, law and punishment are not random. They are precise tools of societal control. Samurai, peasants, merchants, and women all understand the rules, however harsh. Compliance ensures survival, defiance invites consequence. This creates a rhythm in life, fear intertwined with duty, obedience entwined with survival. Some punishments border on the ceremonial, designed to instill respect and awe. Executions, ritual humiliation, and public displays are conducted with ritual precision, reinforcing the values of honor and hierarchy. Death is not merely a penalty, it is a lesson, a spectacle, and a warning. Life and law are inseparable, and fear ensures that the social structure remains intact across generations. In villages, whispers of law enforcement and punishment travel faster than sight or sound. Stories of heads rolling, families punished, or samurai committing seppuku for minor errors circulate, reinforcing the omnipresent sense that society will not forgive carelessness or disrespect. Fear is both the teacher and the method, shaping behavior more effectively than encouragement or reward. For the modern observer, this may seem merciless, extreme, or even cruel. But within this framework, society functions with remarkable precision. The feudal hierarchy is maintained, resources are distributed, labor is enforced, and honor is protected. Fear is not merely punitive, it is a mechanism for survival and social cohesion. And yet, human resilience persists. Even under harsh laws, people find ways to live, adapt, and protect their families. The human spirit negotiates with fear, creating small pockets of agency, subtle resistance, and enduring community. Survival is not passive, it is active. Intelligent and courageous, often hidden beneath the surface of submission. Imagine walking through a village. The rice paddies glisten with morning dew. Children work alongside parents, mindful of every movement. Women manage households with practiced precision. Samurai patrol quietly, their eyes scanning for dishonor. Merchants count coins cautiously. Fear permeates the air, yet life continues, sustained by discipline, vigilance, and the omnipresent law. In feudal Japan, the system of punishment ensured that order, hierarchy, and honor were never optional. Crime, whether large or small, was a breach not only of law but of morality, duty, and tradition. And through fear sharp, constant, and precise, society survived, functioning across generations despite its brutality. That was the reality of law, crime, and punishment in feudal Japan. Brutal, exacting, and terrifying. Yet it shaped a society where obedience, honor, and fear intertwined, creating a civilization of discipline, resilience, and unyielding hierarchy. Merchants, wealth without honor, in the narrow streets of feudal Japan's towns, the scent of fresh produce, drying fish, and steaming rice mingles with the dust kicked up by constant foot traffic. Here, the merchants ply their trade, counting coins, measuring silk, and negotiating deals. They are visible, indispensable to the economy, and yet infamously looked down upon by the very society that depends on them. In a land where honor is measured by labor, swordsmanship, and loyalty, merchants exist in a paradox. Wealth without respect, efficiency without esteem. Born into the merchant class, or rising through trade, they accumulate silver and silk, rice and ceramics. They live comfortably compared to peasants. Often with houses in town centers, servants to run errands, and access to imported goods. Yet, their prosperity is morally suspect. Earning without tilling the land, without wielding a sword, without producing tangible labor, places them near the bottom of the social hierarchy. Their cleverness is tolerated but never admired, their cunning is respected but socially distrusted. Merchants navigate a delicate dance. They must comply with local regulations, pay taxes on earnings and goods, and negotiate constantly with samurai overseers who view them as potential threats. Price gouging, cheating, or simple miscalculations can have swift and severe consequences. A merchant caught overcharging might face fines, confiscation of property, or public shaming. Even wealthy merchants understand that every coin earned carries a shadow of potential ruin. Daily life for a merchant is a blend of calculation, negotiation, and constant awareness. The day begins at dawn, reviewing inventories, inspecting merchandise, and assessing debts. Market stalls must be prepared with precision, goods displayed attractively, measures exact, and prices set to satisfy customers yet remain profitable. They interact with peasants, samurai, and other merchants, each encounter a negotiation with not only coin but trust, social expectation, and subtle power dynamics. The merchant's world is also a world of strategy. Deals are rarely straightforward. Barter, persuasion, and relationships determine success as much as product quality. Maintaining appearances is crucial. A merchant must present both honesty and confidence, balancing shrewdness with perceived morality. A misstep could cost reputation, customers, or worse, the attention of a lord displeased with financial dealings. Merchants were the backbone of trade, yet their influence was invisible in official hierarchies. Rice merchants supplied peasants' tax obligations. Silk traders connected villages to distant provinces. Money lenders enabled samurai households to maintain their estates. They facilitated the economy, allowed wealth to circulate, and yet they remained socially marginalized. Society relied on them, but did not celebrate them. One could argue that the merchant's life is cushioned by comfort, no heavy labor, warm homes, and access to goods beyond the peasantry's reach. But it is a life fraught with pressure and surveillance. Lords and local authorities monitored their activities, competitors watched their every move, and even the peasants were wary of overcharging. A single rumor could tarnish a merchant's reputation, eroding influence or inviting penalties. Trust is both the most valuable and most fragile currency in a merchant's life. Despite social disdain, some merchants found ways to wield influence quietly. Through loans, trade agreements, or political connections, they could affect decisions beyond the marketplace. Wealth allowed them to sponsor temples, fund artisans, or secure favorable marriages. Their power is subtle, indirect, and often unacknowledged by the upper classes, but it shapes the very fabric of society. The moral contradiction of the merchant class is central to their existence. They are neither warriors nor laborers, yet their work supports both. Their wealth can challenge lords, sustain villages, and fund armies. And yet, in the eyes of the samurai, peasants, and elite, earning without labor is inherently suspicious, a sign of moral ambiguity. To be rich is a silent provocation, to be clever is a constant negotiation with social disdain. Women in merchant households also navigate complex roles. They manage finances, maintain accounts, oversee apprentices, and sometimes operate stalls themselves. A woman's acumen could ensure the prosperity of the family, a quiet form of power within a rigid hierarchy. Their labor is often invisible, their intelligence undervalued, yet their contribution is critical to sustaining wealth, influence, and survival in the commercial world. Children of merchants are trained from a young age. They learn arithmetic, measurement, negotiation, and etiquette. Every coin must be counted, every customer treated, every transaction noted. Mistakes are costly, financially, socially, and sometimes physically. By adolescence, the child is not just a student, but a key component of the family enterprise, ensuring continuity and stability. The life of a merchant is also one of vigilance. Markets are competitive. Disputes arise over measurement, pricing, or quality. Samurai patrols may demand payment or protection fees. Peasant customers may withhold goods or delay payments. Success depends not only on skill but on constant awareness of social, economic, and political pressures. Each day requires attention, calculation, and anticipation, a mental marathon that rivals the physical toil of peasants. During festivals or religious ceremonies, merchants participate publicly, offering goods or donations to temples and shrines. These acts reinforce their social presence and spiritual legitimacy. Appearances of honor are cultivated, masking the societal disdain they endure while subtly asserting influence. In these moments, wealth becomes a tool not just for survival, but for negotiation with respect, authority, and perception. Ultimately, merchants exist in a world of contradictions. They are essential yet disrespected, clever yet morally suspect, powerful yet constrained. Their wealth enables survival and influence, but never fully grants social acceptance. They operate in shadows and in light, negotiating with every individual and institution around them, sustaining a society that relies on them while denying them the honor their labor would suggest. Imagine walking through a bustling town. Stalls line the streets. Coins change hands, merchants call out to customers. Wealth circulates, goods are exchanged, deals are struck. And yet, behind the smiles and negotiations, there is a constant awareness of scrutiny, moral judgment, and precarious social standing. Each interaction is a delicate balance between survival, success, and societal expectation. Merchants are a testament to human adaptability. They thrive within constraint, wield power invisibly, and sustain a civilization that often overlooks them. Their story is not one of visible honor or celebrated glory, but a quiet, enduring influence that shapes every corner of feudal Japan. Without merchants, the economy collapses. Without their vigilance, trade ceases. Without their skill, society would falter. That was the life of merchants in feudal Japan. Wealth without honor, influence without recognition, survival through strategy, and the quiet power of a class essential to every layer of society. The untouchables Ada, living among shadows, in the quiet corners of feudal Japan, when narrow lanes wind into shadows and sunlight barely touches the ground, lived a people society preferred to forget. The Eta, often called untouchables, carried the jobs no one else would, the responsibilities no one would speak of, and the burdens no one would honor. They were vital to society, yet invisible to it, moving among the living like ghosts tasked with laboring on life's edges. From birth, an Eta's life is circumscribed by pollution, death, and exclusion. They handle the unavoidable, butchering animals, tanning leather, disposing of corpses, cleaning streets. These tasks are necessary, yet socially despised. The law places them outside conventional society, restricted to certain districts, forbidden from entering temples or mingling freely with the higher classes. Their very existence is defined by the work that others recoil from. Daily life for the Eta is one of endless labor, exposure to disease, and isolation. From the first light, they begin the grim cycle of responsibility. Animals must be slaughtered, hides prepared for leather, waste cleared from the streets. Each task is dangerous, physically demanding, and socially condemned. While the samurai contemplate honor and peasants tend rice fields, the Eta's survival depends on skill, endurance, and the acceptance of being shunned. Their homes are simple, clustered in districts segregated from the main village or town. Privacy is minimal, as space is cramped and resources limited. Children learn early, the only acceptable legacy is the mastery of labor, the ability to endure humiliation, and the necessity of obedience. Any deviation from assigned work invites not just punishment, but deeper societal scorn. Religious life is largely denied. Temples and shrines, centers of communal worship, are often forbidden. Festivals, pilgrimages, and cultural ceremonies, enjoyed by peasants, merchants, and samurai, remain out of reach, reinforcing the societal message: the Ada are present, necessary, yet fundamentally separate. Spiritual isolation mirrors social isolation, leaving a persistent sense of invisibility in a world that depends on them. Despite extreme marginalization, Ada communities develop resilience. Mutual support, skill sharing, and cultural preservation allow them to survive where others would perish. Leatherworking, butchery, and other stigmatized trades become highly specialized arts. Passed from generation to generation, Ada children, learning from parents, absorb lessons in endurance, meticulous technique, and the unspoken rules of navigating a world that condemns their existence. In towns, they move silently through the streets, tools in hand, often ignored by passers-by. The samurai may glance with contempt, peasants with indifference, merchants with mild acknowledgement, but none fully comprehend the essential nature of their labor. The city depends on the Ada for sanitation, for meat, for leather goods. Without them, society would crumble quietly but catastrophically. Yet recognition never comes, appreciation is withheld, and respect is an impossible aspiration. Gender dynamics among the Ada are equally brutal. Women shoulder the same physical labor as men, often while managing households under extreme constraint. They raise children in the shadow of social stigma, teach survival skills honed from centuries of marginalization, and preserve communal knowledge. Ada women embody endurance, adaptability, and courage, quietly defying a society that refuses to value their contribution. Education is practical. Literacy, if present, is rare, often passed informally to manage business with other Ada or negotiate with merchants. Social mobility is non-existent. The Ada are born to their roles and remain there. Escape is impossible. Their world is rigid, defined by necessity, labor, and endurance, a life measured not in honor or wealth, but in survival and the maintenance of society's hidden functions. Their labor is dangerous. Butchering and tanning expose them to injury and disease. Handling corpses demands a careful understanding of health risks. Even the simplest mistakes can have life-threatening consequences, and yet society demands perfection without acknowledgement. A butcher miscalculates and taints the meat. Lives may be affected, but the worker bears the blame alone. Recognition is withheld, punishment is harsh, and survival depends on precision, vigilance, and unflinching commitment. Despite societal scorn, Ada culture thrives in microcosms. Festivals within the district, songs, and rituals unique to their community preserve a sense of identity. These acts are subtle defiance, a way to maintain dignity within a framework designed to strip them of it. Humor, solidarity, and tradition become their tools, invisible to the outside world, yet crucial to internal cohesion. The paradox of the Ada is stark: they are both essential and rejected. Invisible yet indispensable. Society cannot survive without them, yet refuses to acknowledge them as equals. Their labor sustains the very hierarchy that condemns them. They are the shadows upon which the visible world relies, performing the work others deem impure, all while carrying the weight of social ostracism. Even death is fraught with inequality. Their funerals are modest, their tombs separate, and spiritual recognition often denied. Yet life for the Ada is a continuous negotiation with invisibility, a mastery of endurance and skill that sustains society quietly, persistently, and effectively. Walking through an Ada district is like moving through a parallel reality. The streets smell of leather, smoke, and labor. The rhythm of work dominates every movement. Knives scrape, hammers pound, hands move with mechanical precision. Children follow parents silently, learning the intricate balance between skill, social awareness, and survival. Life here is harsh, uncelebrated, and utterly essential. For modern audiences, the Ada represent a stark lesson in human resilience. They endured systemic exclusion, physical danger, and social invisibility, yet they preserved skills, maintained society, and protected families. Their story is not one of honor in the traditional sense, but of survival, resilience, and quiet, enduring impact. That was the life of the Ada in feudal Japan. Invisible, essential, and enduring. A people living among shadows, shaping society with unrecognized skill and relentless perseverance, ensuring that every visible aspect of feudal life could function smoothly. The fall of feudal Japan. Change, modernization, and legacy. The sun rises over Edo, casting golden light on wooden rooftops and the quiet bustle of the early streets. Yet beneath this seemingly timeless rhythm, the winds of change are beginning to stir. Feudal Japan, with its rigid hierarchies, unyielding laws, and deeply embedded traditions, is on the cusp of transformation. The centuries-old order of samurai, peasants, merchants, and Ada, meticulously maintained, brutally enforced, is about to face forces it cannot ignore. The first tremors arrive not with armies or revolutions, but with ships on the horizon. Foreigners bearing strange goods, unfamiliar technologies, and new ideas appear along the coast. Gunpowder, cannons, and Western-style weapons challenge the dominance of the katana. Western trade goods, textiles, clocks, maps, and medicine stir curiosity and ambition. For the samurai, the world they have known, one measured in sword skill, poetry, and strict adherence to Bushido, suddenly feels precarious, incomplete, and vulnerable. Domestically, social pressures begin to mount. Merchants, whose wealth has quietly grown for generations, begin to influence markets and regional economies with unprecedented force. The rigid social hierarchy, which demanded that peasants toil endlessly while samurai held honor and prestige, starts to bend under the weight of economic necessity. Peasants, burdened by heavy taxation and intermittent famine, whisper discontent. Change, subtle but inexorable, begins at the edges of society. The shogunate itself, long considered the unshakable backbone of order, confronts challenges both external and internal. Corruption seeps into administration. Communication and enforcement across distant provinces are imperfect. Samurai retain honor, but their authority is increasingly symbolic. The rigid codes that govern violence, loyalty, and etiquette cannot protect against global trade, political intrigue, and evolving technology. The old ways, meticulous and disciplined, are slowly proving fragile. Education and literacy spread, fueled by merchant families and towns, creating a new consciousness among the common people. Knowledge of the wider world, once contained to elite circles, now permeates villages and cities. Ideas of governance, science, and international relations circulate in ink on paper, carried by traveling merchants and scholars. The feudal social order, once absolute, cannot hold against an informed, questioning populace. The military landscape shifts. Firearms replace bows, cannons replace traditional siege weapons. Samurai warriors, trained in centuries-old techniques, must adapt or risk irrelevance. Yet adaptation is complicated. Honor, duty, and ritual, values that defined life for generations, conflict with the pragmatism and speed demanded by modern warfare. Society struggles to reconcile the romanticism of Bushido with the practicality of modernization. Political upheaval accelerates change. Alliances crumble, rebellions ignite, and regional domains maneuver for advantage. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for centuries, is forced to negotiate with internal dissidents and foreign powers. Authority becomes negotiated rather than absolute, challenging centuries of unquestioned obedience and redefining power structures. For peasants and merchants, life begins to shift. Markets expand, trade with foreigners increases, and wealth starts to influence social dynamics in ways unimaginable under strict feudal order. Merchants gain clout, peasants occasionally access opportunities beyond the rice field, and women begin to participate in new economic spaces, albeit subtly. The rigid social ladder shows cracks, hinting at a society more fluid, less predictable, and more aligned with capability than birthright. The Ada, ever marginalized, find that modernization brings both hope and uncertainty. New industries, sanitation reforms, and urban growth create opportunities for work beyond traditional roles. Yet, centuries of stigma do not vanish overnight. Eta communities must navigate a changing economy, evolving social norms, and lingering prejudice, slowly transforming their place in society while preserving essential skills passed through generations. Culturally, Japan experiences an influx of ideas, arts, and philosophies. Western literature, science, and religious thought merge with traditional Japanese practices, creating a dynamic, hybrid culture. Samurai retain martial arts and rituals. Yet new forms of expression and learning infiltrate every class. Poetry, calligraphy, and performance adapt to a world increasingly influenced by outside perspectives, illustrating the resilience and adaptability of Japanese culture even amidst upheaval. The Meiji Restoration, arriving in the mid-19th century, formalizes these transformations. Samurai privileges dissolve, domains are abolished, and central governance replaces feudal lords. National military, industrial infrastructure, and compulsory education redefine citizen roles. Social mobility, economic opportunity, and individual agency expand dramatically. The careful, rigid structures that dictated centuries of life, from birthright to occupation, from honor codes to punishment, give way to modernization and the promise of personal choice. And yet the legacy of feudal Japan endures. Architecture, ritual, martial arts, etiquette, and cultural values survive and influence future generations. The precision, discipline, and honor cultivated over centuries remain embedded in the national psyche. Even as society modernizes, echoes of samurai ethics, communal discipline, and ritualized respect continue to shape behavior, art, and governance. Modern Japan, bustling with technology, industry, and global influence, carries these layers invisibly. The lessons of survival, adaptation, and meticulous attention to duty, whether learned in rice fields, merchant stalls, or the shadows of Ada districts, persist. Feudal structures may have fallen, but the essence of a disciplined, resilient, and honor-conscious society lingers, informing identity, culture, and values to this day. Walking through modern cities, one might never imagine the icy waters, the strict codes, the harsh punishments, and the invisible labor that defined feudal Japan. And yet, every architectural detail, every cultural ritual, every moment of ceremonial respect carries whispers of that past. A society once rigid and brutal has left an indelible mark, blending discipline, endurance, and subtle artistry into the foundations of a modern nation. The fall of feudal Japan was not sudden, it was an evolution shaped by technology, trade, knowledge, and resilience. The samurai, peasants, merchants, and Ada all played roles in this transformation. Their stories, of honor, toil, cunning, invisibility, and endurance, weave together to create a history both harsh and beautiful, brutal and poetic, rigid and transformative. That was the story of feudal Japan, from the icy dawn of samurai discipline to the bustling streets of modernization, a society of structure, fear, labor, honor, and invisible strength. A civilization that endured, adapted, and left a legacy that continues to resonate across centuries.